And get your filthy hands off my cart!
The flight attendant ripped the napkin away and threw it in the black woman's face.
You stink! You're making my first-class passengers uncomfortable. Can you not smell yourself?
The woman stared back, calm. The attendant didn't stop.
12 years I've worked in this cabin, and every time one of you sneaks up here, it's the same thing. Dirty seats! Greasy fingerprints everywhere. You people are like trash that keeps blowing in.
A passenger gasped. The attendant didn't care.
Go back to the economy where you belong. Shoo. Like the dog you are.
The woman stood, straightened her blazer.
I'd like your name and employee number.
The attendant's hand cracked across her face. That slap just cost this airline $400 million. Have you ever watched someone destroy their entire life with one moment of pure hatred? Let me take you back to the beginning, 6 hours before that slap. 5:45 in the morning, Atlanta, Georgia. The Buckhead neighborhood. Old trees, quiet streets, the kind of block where sprinklers hiss before sunrise, and every driveway has 2 cars minimum. Fiona Powell stood barefoot in her kitchen, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. The marble countertop was cool under her elbows. Morning light crept through the window and caught the steam rising from her mug. She wasn't scrolling social media. She was reading a contract summary. 46 pages. Horizon Defense Systems, the aerospace and defense company where she served as chief procurement officer. The document on her screen was worth $400 million, a fuel and logistics deal with Skybridge Airlines. 5-year term, her signature on the dotted line. Fiona controlled the fuel that kept Skybridge's entire domestic fleet in the air. But if you saw her that morning, you'd never guess it. No designer labels, no diamond rings, just a plain white t-shirt, gray joggers, and reading glasses slipping down her nose. That was Fiona. Power without performance. She grew up on the south side of Chicago. Her mother cleaned hotel rooms. Her father drove a city bus for 31 years. The first time Fiona ever stepped on an airplane, she was 22, a scholarship trip to an engineering conference at MIT. She remembered pressing her face to that tiny oval window, watching Chicago shrink below her, thinking, this is what it feels like to rise. Now she ran a department with a budget bigger than most countries' GDP. Her husband came down the stairs, Derek Collins, tall, calm, the kind of man who smiled before he spoke. Pediatric surgeon at Emory, hands that saved children's lives 5 days a week. He leaned over her shoulder, saw the contract on her screen, and sighed. Babe, it's our anniversary trip. Close the laptop. She laughed. One more paragraph. You said that 40 minutes ago. She closed the laptop. He kissed her forehead. 15 years married today. They were flying to San Francisco, then driving up to Napa Valley, wine country. 3 days. No meetings, no board calls, just the two of them. Derek carried both suitcases to the car. Fiona locked the front door and paused for a second on the porch. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and magnolia. A jogger waved from across the street. She waved back. A normal morning. A beautiful morning. They had no idea what was coming. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. Even at 7 a.m., the terminal hummed like a living thing. Wheels on tile, announcements bouncing off the ceiling, the smell of Cinnabon mixing with jet fuel from the gates. Fiona and Derek moved through security without any trouble. First-class boarding passes, TSA pre-check, smooth and simple. At the gate, a young mother was struggling, toddler on one hip, diaper bag sliding off her shoulder, boarding pass crumpled in her fist. Fiona stepped aside and waved her forward in line. The woman mouthed, "Thank you," with exhausted eyes. That was who Fiona was. Quiet kindness, no audience needed. Gate B14, Skybridge Airlines Flight 341 to San Francisco. Boarding began at 8:15. Group 1, First Class. Fiona and Derek walked down the jetway. The air shifted from terminal cold to jetway warmth. That stale, recycled airplane smell hit them as they stepped through the cabin door. The first class was small, 4 rows, wide leather seats, warm lighting, champagne flutes already set on white cloth napkins, soft jazz playing through the speakers, and standing at the entrance, greeting every passenger with a bright, bleached smile, Brenda Nolan, senior flight attendant, 12-year veteran of Skybridge, blonde hair pinned tight, uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass. She radiated authority. The white couple ahead of Fiona got the full treatment. "Welcome aboard! Oh, I love your bag. Is that the new Toomey? You two look amazing. Let me take your coats." Warm, charming, professional. Then Fiona and Derek stepped through the door. Brenda's smile didn't disappear. It shifted. The warmth left her eyes like someone flipped a switch. Her lips stayed curved, but the muscles around her jaw tightened. She didn't greet them. She didn't offer to take their coats. She looked Fiona up and down, from her flat shoes to her natural hair, and stepped slightly into the aisle. Not enough to fully block them, just enough to make them squeeze past. Derek noticed. Fiona noticed. Neither said a word. They found their seats, 2A and 2B. Fiona slid in by the window. Derek took the aisle. The morning was still beautiful, but something in the air had already changed. It started before the plane even left the ground. Fiona had barely settled into her seat when Brenda appeared in the aisle. Not with a smile, not with a welcome. She stood over Fiona like a teacher catching a student in the wrong classroom. "Boarding pass, let me see it." Fiona looked up. "Excuse me?" "Your boarding pass. Show it to me, now." No please, no ma'am, just a flat demand with a hand already extended. Fiona pulled the pass from her blazer pocket and handed it over. Brenda snatched it. She held it up to the overhead light, turned it over, ran her thumbnail across the barcode like she was checking for a counterfeit bill. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The white couple across the aisle watched in silence. Brenda squinted at the pass, then held it up again. She angled it left, angled it right, like she was examining a piece of evidence at a crime scene. "Where did you get this?" Fiona's voice stayed level. "I bought it 6 weeks ago, online." "Mm-hmm." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin smile. "You'd be surprised how often people end up in seats they didn't pay for. Upgrades get confused, passes get swapped. It happens." She said, "It happens," the way someone says, "things go missing," while staring at the only black person in the room. Derek leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" Brenda didn't look at him. "I'm not talking to you." She flipped the pass one more time, then shoved it back toward Fiona without making eye contact. "I'll verify this with the gate agent. Stay here." She walked away. Fiona sat there, a standing pass crumpled in her hand, while every first-class passenger pretended to look somewhere else. The woman in row 1 suddenly found her magazine fascinating. The man in row 4 stared intensely at his shoes. 3 full minutes passed. Fiona counted every second. Brenda returned. No apology, no explanation. She simply said, "It checks out, for now." Then she turned on her heel and walked toward the galley. For now. Like Fiona was on probation in her own seat. Derek reached over and squeezed her hand. His grip was tighter than usual. "Let it go," she whispered. "It's our anniversary." He nodded. but his free hand was already balled into a fist on the armrest. 5 minutes later, the pre-departure drink service began. Brenda transformed. She floated through the cabin like a completely different human being. Row 1, champagne with a smile. Here you go, darling. Welcome aboard. Row 3, champagne and warm mixed nuts in a porcelain dish. Can I get you anything else? A blanket, perhaps? Extra pillow? Row 4, champagne, a wink, a laugh at something that wasn't even funny. Oh, you are too much. Enjoy the flight, sweetheart. Warm, charming, radiant. Then she reached row 2. She walked right past Fiona and Derek, didn't slow down, didn't glance sideways, didn't acknowledge they existed. Like their seats were empty, like they were ghosts. Derek waited a full minute, then he pressed the call button. The soft chime rang through the cabin. Brenda returned with the enthusiasm of someone answering a parking ticket. What? Not what can I get you, not how can I help, just what? Derek kept his voice steady. We'd like 2 glasses of champagne, please. Brenda tilted her head. Champagne is reserved for our premium guests. Derek blinked. We are in first class. These are first-class tickets. I'm aware of where you're sitting. I said premium guests. We have a limited supply, and I need to manage distribution carefully. Airline policy. The man in seat 3C, white, mid-50s, silver hair, reading glasses hanging from his collar, lowered his newspaper. He'd been watching quietly since the boarding pass incident. You just poured 4 glasses from a full bottle. The bottle is still sitting right there on the cart. I can see it from here. Brenda shot him a look that could freeze a bonfire. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I'll handle service in my cabin my way. Thank you. She turned back to Fiona and Derek, paused, reached under the cart, then placed 2 plastic cups of water on their tray tables. Not crystal glasses, not glass at all. Plastic. The same flimsy cups they hand out in economy with the drink cart. She set them down hard enough for the water to splash onto the white linen napkins. There you go. Hydration is important, she smiled, but the smile had teeth. She walked away. Fiona stared at the plastic cup sitting on her tray table. Around her, every other first-class passenger held a crystal champagne flute, golden bubbles rising in the light. She picked up the plastic cup and took a sip. The water was lukewarm. It tasted like nothing. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. This is deliberate. Fiona nodded slowly. I know. We should say something, right now. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. The plane pushed back from the gate. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The safety video played on the overhead screens. Passengers settled into their seats. Phones slipped into pockets. Laptops closed. Fiona opened hers. Just for a moment. One last check on a shipping confirmation for the anniversary dinner she'd planned in Napa. A private vineyard dinner under string lights. A surprise for Derek. She needed to confirm the reservation before they lost their cell signal. She didn't even get to her inbox. Ma'am, Brenda was back, standing directly over her. Arms crossed tight against her chest. Voice pitched loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. All personal electronic devices need to be stowed for taxi and departure. That is a federal regulation. Close it. Fiona looked up. We haven't begun the takeoff roll yet. I'll close it in just a now. Not in a moment, not in a minute, now. Unless you'd like me to report you to the captain for passenger non-compliance. I can have this aircraft returned to the gate. Your choice. Fiona glanced around the cabin. Row 1. A man was casually scrolling his iPad, feet up. Row 3. A woman was texting with both thumbs, not even trying to hide it. Row 4. A teenager had AirPods in, watching a movie on a tablet with the brightness at full. None of them were told anything. None of them were even glanced at. Just Fiona. Derek couldn't hold it back this time. Are you serious right now? Half the cabin has their devices out. You can see them. Why are you only talking to... Sir? Brenda's voice snapped like a whip. I will not ask again. I am the senior crew member on this aircraft. You will comply, or I will involve the flight deck and have you both removed. Final warning. Removed. Both of them. For an open laptop during taxi. The cabin was watching now. Every single passenger. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked at the floor. The man in 3C shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. The woman in row 1 put down her magazine and stared at Brenda with her mouth slightly open. Nobody said a word. Fiona closed the laptop, slid it into the seatback pocket without a sound. She turned her face toward the window and stared at the runway lights streaking past in blurred orange lines as the plane began to accelerate. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark glass. She could see the tension in her own face, the tight line of her mouth, the way her eyes had gone hard and flat, like she was holding something behind them that took real effort to keep inside. 15 years of climbing. MIT engineering. Harvard MBA. Boardrooms where she was the only black face at a table of 20. Senate hearings where she testified on defense procurement policy. Meetings with 4-star generals who shook her hand and called her ma'am and meant it with respect. And here, on a Tuesday morning flight to San Francisco, a woman in a polyester uniform with a $12 name badge was treating her like a criminal in her own seat. The plane lifted off. Atlanta shrank below. The wheels folded into the belly of the aircraft with a heavy thud. The cabin rattled gently as they climbed through a thick layer of gray clouds. Then sunlight broke through, sudden, blinding, golden. Brenda passed through the aisle one more time. She paused at row 2 just long enough to glance down at Fiona. A quick, sharp look, checking, making sure she was still sitting, still quiet, still in her place. Then she turned, smiled at the couple in row 1, and disappeared into the galley. Derek exhaled slowly through his nose. He hadn't unclenched his fist since the champagne. His knuckles ached. When we land, he said quietly, I'm filing a formal complaint. Fiona didn't respond. She was watching the clouds slide beneath them like a white ocean. Below, Georgia was giving way to Alabama. Red clay and green forest stretching to the horizon. Rivers catching sunlight like silver thread. She thought about her mother, 63 years old, still cleaning hotel rooms in Chicago, still saying yes ma'am to women who never said thank you, still smiling at people who looked right through her like she was furniture. Fiona had spent her entire career making sure she would never be powerless like that. She earned her degrees, built her name, signed contracts worth more than some airlines' total annual revenue. And none of it mattered. Not here, not to Brenda Nolan. To her, Fiona Powell was just another black woman who didn't deserve a nice seat. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. Derek unclipped his belt and leaned his head back. 3 more hours, just 3 more hours and we're in Napa. Fiona turned from the window. She looked at her husband. His jaw was locked. His eyes were heavy, not from sleep, but from the weight of holding himself back. She placed her hand over his fist, gently, until his fingers slowly uncurled. I know, she said. Somewhere in the back galley, Brenda Nolan was pouring herself a fresh coffee and laughing loudly with another crew member about something none of the passengers could hear. 3 more hours. But the worst hadn't even started yet. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over Mississippi, the cabin had settled into that quiet cruise rhythm. Soft engine hum, pages turning, ice clinking in glasses. Fiona needed to use the restroom. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and walked 3 steps toward the first-class lavatory at the front of the cabin. The vacant sign glowed green. The door was right there. Brenda materialized out of nowhere. She stepped directly into Fiona's path, one hand on the lavatory door, the other on her hip. This restroom is out of order. Fiona looked at the green vacant sign, then back at Brenda. The sign says it's available. The sign is wrong. I'm telling you it's out of order. You'll need to use the facilities in the rear of the aircraft. The rear. Past business class, past economy, all the way to the back of the plane. A 5-minute walk each way through a narrow aisle packed with sleeping passengers and drink carts. Fiona held Brenda's gaze. Is there a maintenance issue? I said it's out of order. That's all you need to know. The rear lavatory is available. Use that one. Fiona stood still for a moment. The air between them was thick enough to chew. Then she turned and made the long walk to the back of the plane. Every step felt deliberate. Past business class, where a man looked up from his laptop and watched her pass. Past the curtain divider. Past rows and rows of economy passengers, some sleeping, some watching screens, none of them knowing what was happening in the cabin up front. She reached the rear lavatory, waited 4 minutes for it to open, used it, washed her hands in a sink the size of a cereal bowl, and made the long walk back. When she passed through the first-class curtain, she saw it immediately. A white woman from row 4 was stepping out of the out-of-order lavatory, drying her hands on a paper towel. Brenda was standing right there, smiling at her like a hotel concierge. All good? Can I get you anything else, hon? Fiona stopped walking. Derek saw her face. He started to stand. She shook her head, just barely, a tiny movement that said, "Not yet." She sat down, buckled her belt. Her hands were steady, but her breathing had changed. Shorter, sharper. Derek leaned close to her ear. She sent you to the back of the plane so a white woman could use the bathroom. I know. Fiona. I know. 20 minutes passed. Fiona closed her eyes, not sleeping, just holding herself still, like if she stayed perfectly quiet, perfectly controlled, the flight would end and they could walk away from this and never think about it again. She was wrong. Ma'am, I need to check your carry-on bag. Fiona opened her eyes. Brenda was standing over her again, but this time she wasn't looking at Fiona. She was looking at the leather bag tucked under the seat in front of her. Excuse me? Carry-on compliance check. Your bag may exceed the size requirements for underseat storage. I need to inspect it. Derek sat up straight. You haven't checked anyone else's bag on this entire flight. Brenda ignored him completely. She bent down and reached for Fiona's bag. Don't touch that. Fiona's voice was firm. Not loud, not aggressive, firm. The way a woman speaks when she's used to being obeyed in rooms far more powerful than this one. Brenda paused, just for a second. Then she pulled the bag out anyway. Federal aviation safety regulations give crew members the authority to inspect any carry-on luggage that may pose a safety risk. If you have a problem with that, I can note your non-cooperation in the flight report. She unzipped the bag right there in the aisle, in front of everyone. The man in 3C reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He angled it carefully, hit record. His face was stone. Brenda rifled through Fiona's belongings like she was sorting through a bin at a thrift store. She pulled out a silk scarf and dropped it on the armrest. A leather wallet. Opened it, glanced inside, tossed it back. A phone charger. Held it up, examined it, dropped it on the seat. Then she found the portfolio. A black leather document folder with the Horizon Defense Systems logo embossed in silver on the cover. Inside, the Skybridge Airlines fuel and logistics contract. $400 million, summarized in 46 pages of dense legal text. Brenda flipped it open, glanced at the first page. She didn't read it, didn't understand what she was holding. She shoved it back into the bag like it was a takeout menu. Then she found something else. A small amber prescription bottle. Fiona's blood pressure medication. The label had her full name, her doctor's name, the pharmacy address, private medical information. Brenda held it up, high, above the seat back, where every passenger in first class could see it. "And what's this?" Derek's voice came out low and dangerous. "That is her prescribed medication. Put it back, right now. I need to verify that all medications on board are put it back." Brenda looked at Derek for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but calculation. She was deciding how far to push. She dropped the bottle back into the bag. It clattered against the other items she'd scattered. She didn't zip the bag closed. She didn't put anything back in order. She just stood up, smoothed her uniform, and said, "Everything checks out. For now." For now. That phrase again, like a threat wearing a uniform. She walked back toward the galley without looking back. Fiona looked down at her open bag. Her belongings, her personal, private things, were jumbled together like someone had shaken the bag and dumped it. The scarf was wrinkled. The wallet was splayed open. The medication bottle was on its side, cap barely hanging on. She zipped the bag slowly, carefully, one tooth at a time. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, from the sheer physical effort of keeping everything locked inside her chest. Derek was breathing through his teeth. His eyes glistened. Not from sadness, from a rage held so tight it had nowhere to go except deeper inside. 3 more hours, Fiona whispered. "No," Derek said quietly. "This ends when we land. I promise you that." In the galley, hidden behind a thin blue curtain, a young woman stood frozen, with her back pressed against the beverage cart. Alicia Moore, 24 years old, junior flight attendant, 6 months into her first airline job. She had been watching Brenda since the moment Fiona and Derek boarded. Every look, every denial, every calculated humiliation. Her hands were shaking. Her phone was in her right hand, screen facing the gap in the curtain. She had started recording during the bag inspection. The small red dot in the corner of her screen blinked steadily. She had captured everything. Brenda pulling items from the bag, holding the medication above the seats. The expression on Fiona's face as she watched a stranger display her private life to a cabin full of strangers. Alicia knew she should say something. She knew there were procedures, crew conduct protocols, a reporting hotline she'd memorized during training. She also knew what happened to people who reported Brenda Nolan. The last flight attendant who filed a complaint had been reassigned to red-eye cargo routes for 3 months straight. She eventually quit. The complaint disappeared. Brenda stayed. So Alicia stood behind that curtain, phone recording, hands trembling, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She didn't stop filming. Back in the cabin, Phil Sutton, the retired attorney in 3C, lowered his phone and checked his footage. Clear video, clean audio. Every word is captured. He saved the file, then opened a fresh recording and propped the phone against his armrest, lens aimed directly at row 2. 2 cameras now, 2 witnesses, 2 separate recordings, and Brenda Nolan had absolutely no idea. The seatbelt sign chimed on. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm, routine. Folks, we've got a patch of rough air ahead. Please return to your seats and keep those belts fastened. The plane shuddered, dropped 10 feet without warning. Coffee sloshed over the rim of a mug in row 3. A child somewhere in the economy let out a sharp scream. The overhead bins rattled like loose teeth. Fiona gripped her armrest. Derek gripped his. Their knuckles mirrored each other, tight, bloodless, holding on. But the real turbulence had nothing to do with the weather. Something was building inside that cabin. Every passenger could feel it. The air was too still. The silence was too loaded, like the moment before a glass finally shatters. And Brenda Nolan was about to make the biggest mistake of her entire life. The seatbelt sign turned off. The turbulence passed. The cabin exhaled. Fiona unbuckled her belt and stood up. She needed air. She needed space. She needed 2 minutes away from that seat where she had swallowed every insult for the last 3 hours. She stepped into the aisle and stretched her shoulders. That was all. She wasn't blocking anyone. She wasn't making a scene. She was standing in the aisle of a cabin she paid to sit in. Brenda came out of the galley like she'd been waiting. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated." Fiona looked at her. "The seatbelt sign is off." "I don't care. You're blocking the aisle and creating a safety hazard. Sit down." "I'm stretching my legs. I'll sit down in a moment." Brenda stepped closer, close enough that Fiona could smell the stale coffee on her breath, close enough that the other passengers could see the vein pulsing in Brenda's neck. "I have asked you multiple times today to follow simple instructions. You clearly have a problem with authority. So let me make this easy for you." She pointed one finger directly at Fiona's face. Her nail almost touched Fiona's nose. "Sit down now, or I will have you restrained and arrested when we land." Fiona didn't move. She didn't blink. She looked at Brenda's finger hovering an inch from her face. Then she looked past it, directly into Brenda's eyes. "I would like your full name and employee identification number. I'm filing a formal complaint." The cabin went dead silent. Brenda's face twisted. Her lips pulled back from her teeth. Something behind her eyes snapped. Whatever thin wire had been holding her composure together finally broke. She swung her open hand and slapped Fiona across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Sharp, loud, final. Fiona's head turned with the force of it. Her hand went to her cheek. The skin was already hot, already swelling. Her eyes watered, not from emotion, but from the sheer physical shock of being struck. Derek shot out of his seat. "Are you out of your mind?" The man in 3C stood up. The woman in row 1 covered her mouth with both hands. A passenger in row 4 said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh my God." Brenda took a step back. Her hand was still open, still raised. She looked at it like it belonged to someone else. Then the mask came back on. Crooked, cracked, but she tried. She was threatening me. You all saw it. She was being aggressive and I had to defend myself. Nobody agreed. Nobody nodded. The woman in row 1 shook her head slowly. She didn't do anything. She was just standing there. Phil Sutton held up his phone. The screen was facing Brenda. The red recording dot blinked in the corner. I have everything. Every single second. Behind the galley curtain, Alicia Moore stood with her phone pressed against her chest. She was crying silently. The recording was still running. Fiona lowered her hand from her cheek. The mark was visible now, red, swelling, the shape of 4 fingers printed across her brown skin. She sat down, slowly, calmly, like a woman who had made a decision. She reached into the seat back pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. It rang twice. Janet, it's Fiona. Her voice was steady, clear, not a single tremor. I need you to pull the Skybridge Airlines contract, the full package, fuel and logistics, $400 million. Freeze all pending payments effective immediately. No disbursements until further notice. She paused, listened, then spoke again. Yes, all of it. Contact legal. I want a formal review initiated by end of business today. And Janet, get me the name of Skybridge's chief counsel. I'll be calling them personally. She ended the call, placed the phone on her lap, folded her hands. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the air recycling through the vents. Captain Ted Haywood stepped out of the cockpit. His co-pilot had taken over. He'd been radioed about a disturbance, physical altercation in first class, and his face was tight with concern. He saw Fiona first, the red handprint on her cheek. Then he saw Brenda standing in the aisle with her arms hanging limp at her sides. Then he saw Phil Sutton's phone, still recording. What happened here? 3 passengers spoke at once. Haywood raised a hand. He turned to Phil. Sir, may I see that? Phil handed over the phone. Haywood watched 10 seconds of footage. His face changed. The color drained from it like water from a sink. He looked at Brenda. Go to the rear galley, now. Do not speak to any passengers. Then he turned to Fiona. Ma'am, I am deeply sorry. Can I... Captain! Fiona's voice stopped him mid-sentence. My name is Fiona Powell. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at Horizon Defense Systems. Your airline has a $400 million contract with my company. That contract supplies fuel and logistics for your entire domestic fleet. She paused. Let every word settle into the silence like a stone dropping into still water. As of 2 minutes ago, that contract is frozen. Haywood's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hand gripped the top of seat 1A so hard his knuckles went white. He knew exactly what Horizon Defense Systems was. Every captain in the industry did. Horizon didn't just supply fuel. They were the backbone of mid-tier airline operations. Without them, Skybridge couldn't fly. He reached for the intercom and radioed operations on the ground. In the rear galley, Brenda Nolan stood alone. She could hear the murmuring from the cabin. She could feel the shift. The ground beneath her was already gone. She just didn't know how far she was about to fall. The plane touched down at San Francisco International at 1:47 p.m. Pacific time. The wheels hit the tarmac hard. The engines roared into reverse thrust. The cabin shuddered as the aircraft slowed. But inside the first class, nobody moved. Nobody reached for the overhead bins. Nobody checked their phones. They all sat perfectly still, watching, waiting, because they knew something was about to happen. Captain Haywood's voice came through the speakers, calm, measured, professional. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Please remain seated. We have a situation that requires ground personnel to board the aircraft before deplaning begins. Thank you for your patience. A situation. That was one word for it. Through the small oval windows, Fiona could see them gathering on the tarmac. 2 airport police officers in dark uniforms, a woman in a Skybridge corporate blazer clutching a tablet to her chest, a man in a gray suit pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, sweat visible on his forehead even from 50 feet away. The cabin door opened. The jet bridge air rushed in, cool, metallic, smelling of concrete and jet exhaust. The police officers boarded first. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Everyone on that plane already knew who they were there for. Brenda Nolan was escorted from the rear galley. She walked down the first-class aisle one last time, the same aisle where she had denied champagne, blocked the lavatory, searched a bag, held up private medication, and struck a passenger across the face. She was crying, mascara streaking down both cheeks in thin black lines. Her hands were clasped together in front of her like she was praying. "It was a misunderstanding," she kept saying. "Please, it was just a misunderstanding. She provoked me. I would never." Nobody in the cabin looked at her with sympathy. The woman in row 1 turned her face toward the window. The man in row 4 stared straight ahead. Phil Sutton watched her pass with the steady, unblinking gaze of a man who had spent 30 years in courtrooms. The officers guided Brenda through the cabin door and down the jet bridge. Her footsteps echoed and then faded. Gone. Fiona watched her go. She didn't feel satisfaction. She didn't feel relief. She felt the dull ache in her cheek and the weight of 3 hours pressing down on her shoulders like wet concrete. The woman in the Skybridge blazer boarded next. She introduced herself as the Regional Vice President of Customer Experience. Her voice was shaking. Her hands were shaking. Everything about her was shaking. "Mrs. Powell, on behalf of Skybridge Airlines, I want to personally extend our deepest and most sincere—" Fiona raised one hand. The woman stopped mid-sentence. "I don't need your apology. I need to know what your airline intends to do, structurally, formally, in writing." The regional VP swallowed hard. She looked at the man in the gray suit still pacing on the tarmac, then back at Fiona. "Of course, absolutely. We will. Our executive team is already good. Have your chief counsel contact my legal team by 6 p.m. today. If I don't hear from them, the contract termination moves from review to execution. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am. Completely clear." Fiona stood up. Derek stood beside her. He reached up and pulled their bags from the overhead bin. His movements were slow and deliberate. His jaw was still tight, but his eyes had softened. The storm was passing. As they walked toward the cabin door, Phil Sutton stood up from 3C. He extended his hand to Fiona. "Phil Sutton, retired attorney. I have the entire incident on video, clear audio, clear visual, time-stamped. If you need a witness statement, here's my card." Fiona took the card, looked at it, then looked at him. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I'll be in touch." They stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Their rolling bags clicked rhythmically against the metal floor. Derek put his arm around Fiona's shoulders. She leaned into him, just slightly, just for a second. The first crack in the armor she'd been wearing for 3 hours. "Happy anniversary," he said quietly. She almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught somewhere between her throat and her chest and came out as a long, shaky breath. "Yeah, she said. "Happy anniversary." Behind them, the plane sat at the gate. Passengers were finally deplaning, murmuring to each other in low, stunned voices. The Skybridge Regional VP was still standing in the first-class cabin, staring at the empty seat 2A like it was a crime scene. Which, in many ways, it was. The video hit the internet at 4:12 p.m. Pacific Time, 3 hours after landing. Phil Sutton uploaded it to his Twitter account with a single caption. "This is what happened on Skybridge Flight 341 today. First class. Watch until the end." By midnight, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, 4 million, and climbing. The clip was 3 minutes and 41 seconds long. It showed everything. Brenda's voice, sharp, loud, unmistakable, telling Fiona her bag needed inspection. The items being pulled out one by one. The prescription bottle held up high for the cabin to see. And then the slap. The sound alone made people flinch through their screens. The comment section exploded. Thousands of replies per hour. The hashtags came fast. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag Skybridge shame. Hashtag justice for Fiona. By Tuesday afternoon, all three were trending nationally. CNN picked it up first, then NBC, then CBS. The Root ran a feature within 24 hours. Local Atlanta stations led their evening broadcasts with the story. The clip of the slap played on a loop, on television screens, on phones, on laptops in coffee shops across the country. Everyone was watching. Everyone had an opinion. And Skybridge Airlines was drowning. Their social media accounts were flooded. Tens of thousands of comments under every post. People shared their own stories of being humiliated on flights. Former Skybridge employees came forward with anonymous accounts of racial profiling they had witnessed and reported, reports that went nowhere. The pressure built like water behind a cracking dam. 72 hours after the incident, Skybridge CEO Gregory Saunders held a press conference at the airline's headquarters in Dallas. He stood behind a podium with the Skybridge logo on it, the same logo that was now being turned into memes across every platform. His statement was careful, rehearsed, lawyer-approved. He called the incident isolated and deeply disturbing. He announced that Brenda Nolan had been terminated effective immediately. He expressed profound regret to Fiona Powell and her family. He promised a comprehensive internal review of crew conduct policies. It wasn't enough, not even close. Because the same afternoon, Horizon Defense Systems issued its own press release. 3 paragraphs, no filler, no corporate softness. The statement read, in part, Horizon Defense Systems does not maintain business partnerships with organizations that tolerate discrimination against any individual, including our own executives. Effective immediately, the fuel and logistics contract with Skybridge Airlines, valued at $400 million over 5 years, has been terminated. Terminated. Not suspended, not under review, terminated. The financial fallout was immediate and brutal. Skybridge stock dropped 8% in a single trading day. 8%, wiped off the board before the closing bell. Financial analysts went on cable news and broke down the numbers in real time. The contract loss alone was catastrophic, but the reputational damage made it worse. Industry experts estimated that the total cost, lost contracts, canceled partnerships, legal fees, declining ticket sales, could exceed $600 million over the next 5 years. Other corporate partners began quietly distancing themselves. A hotel chain pulled its co-branded credit card promotion. A rental car company paused its partnership negotiations. A tech firm that had been in talks for an in-flight entertainment deal went silent. Skybridge was bleeding from every direction. And then the legal system caught up with Brenda Nolan. She was charged with assault and battery. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 separate video recordings, a cabin full of witnesses, a visible injury documented by airport medical staff within 30 minutes of landing. Her attorney requested a plea deal. The district attorney, facing intense public scrutiny, declined. The case went to trial. During discovery, something else surfaced. 6 previous complaints had been filed against Brenda Nolan over the past 8 years. 6. All from passengers of color. All describing similar patterns: hostility during boarding, denial of services, fabricated policy violations, verbal abuse. Every single complaint had been buried, filed away, marked as resolved without investigation. The supervisor who had handled them, a man named Gerald Whitfield, since retired, had signed off on each dismissal. A pattern so clean it looked deliberate. Because it was. The complaints were entered into evidence. The jury saw every one. Brenda's defense tried everything. Her attorney argued stress, argued exhaustion, argued that Fiona had been combative and that Brenda had acted in self-defense. The video destroyed every argument in real time. The jury watched Fiona standing still in the aisle, calm, hands at her sides, asking for a name and employee number. Then the slap. Self-defense requires a threat. There was no threat. There was a black woman who refused to be invisible. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. Misdemeanor assault and battery. Brenda Nolan was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, specifically with civil rights organizations, and a fine of $15,000. She was permanently banned from working in commercial aviation by the FAA. Her 12-year career ended in a courtroom on a Wednesday afternoon. But the consequences didn't stop with Brenda. Skybridge Airlines, under mounting pressure from shareholders, advocacy groups, and the federal government, announced a complete overhaul of its discrimination complaint process. An independent civil rights consulting firm was hired to audit every complaint filed in the last decade. Mandatory bias training was implemented company-wide, not a 2-hour webinar, but a 40-hour program with external facilitators, follow-up assessments, and accountability benchmarks. A passenger advocacy hotline was established. A new ombudsman position was created, reporting directly to the board of directors, with authority to investigate crew conduct without interference from middle management. Gregory Saunders, in a last attempt to salvage the airline's most critical contract, personally called Fiona Powell. He asked if Horizon Defense Systems would consider reinstating the fuel agreement under new terms. Fiona listened. She let him finish. Then she spoke. Mr. Saunders, trust is not a renewable resource. Your airline will need to earn it back. Not from me, from every passenger who walks through your doors and wonders if they'll be treated like a human being. She hung up. The contract stayed dead. 2 weeks later, Fiona and Derek finally made it to Napa Valley. Different airlines, different seats, but the same anniversary trip they had planned, just 14 days late. The rental car wound through rolling green hills dotted with grapevines. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the windshield like warm honey. The air smelled like crushed lavender and dry oak. Derek had the window down. Fiona had her shoes off, bare feet on the dashboard, eyes closed. No contracts, no phones, no Brenda Nolan. Just the two of them. Just the sound of tires on a country road, and a man humming a song his wife loved. They pulled into a small vineyard outside Yountville. Stone walls, string lights draped between old wooden posts. A long table set for two, under a canopy of wisteria. White linen, candles already flickering in the early evening breeze. Derek had rebooked the surprise dinner. Same vineyard, same menu. He'd called the owner personally and explained, without details, that they'd had a rough start to their trip and needed something beautiful. The owner had simply said, "Say no more." Fiona sat down at the table. She looked at the candles, the flowers, the hills disappearing into a pink and gold sunset. She reached across the white linen and took Derek's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for not losing your temper on that plane, for holding it together when I needed you to." Derek shook his head. "You held it together better than anyone I've ever known." She smiled, a real one. The first real smile since before that flight. They drank wine. They ate food they couldn't pronounce. They laughed about things that had nothing to do with airlines or contracts or first-class cabins. For one evening, the world was exactly the right size, just big enough for a table, 2 chairs, and 15 years of love. 3 months later, Fiona stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., the National Aviation Association annual conference. 2,000 people in the audience, airline executives, government officials, journalists. Cameras lining the back wall like a firing squad made of glass and light. She didn't talk about the contract. She didn't talk about the money. She talked about a little girl from the south side of Chicago who took Greyhound buses because her family couldn't afford plane tickets. A girl who pressed her face to the window of a city bus every morning and watched airplanes climb into the sky, wondering what it felt like to be up there. "The first time I flew," she said, "I was 22 years old. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to rise, to leave the ground and go somewhere you've never been." She paused. 2,000 people held their breath. Everyone deserves that feeling, regardless of the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the assumptions someone makes in the first 3 seconds of seeing them. Aviation should be about elevation in every sense of the word. Standing ovation, 2,000 people on their feet. The applause echoed off the ceiling like rolling thunder. That same month, Fiona established the Powell Foundation for Equity in Travel. The foundation provided legal aid to passengers who experienced discrimination on commercial flights. It funded diversity recruitment programs across the airline industry. It partnered with universities to create scholarships for students of color pursuing careers in aviation. The first scholarship recipient was a 20-year-old woman from Detroit who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Her name was Tanya. She cried when she got the call. As for Alicia Moore, the junior flight attendant who stood behind that galley curtain with shaking hands and a recording phone, she cooperated fully with the investigation. Her footage became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. She testified in court with steady hands and a clear voice. She resigned from Skybridge the day after the trial ended. Within a month, she was hired by another airline. Within a year, she was promoted to lead flight attendant. She kept a small handwritten card tucked inside her uniform pocket. Nobody ever saw it. It read, "Courage is doing the right thing when your hands are shaking." She credited Fiona Powell for teaching her what that meant. And Brenda Nolan? She completed her 200 hours of community service. She sat in restorative justice circles and listened to people of color share their experiences with discrimination. Real stories, real pain, from real people sitting 3 feet away from her. She was quiet in those rooms. Whether she truly changed, whether the lesson reached somewhere deeper than her legal obligation, nobody could say for certain. But the system held her accountable, and that mattered. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone looked at you and decided, before you spoke a single word, that you didn't belong? Maybe at a restaurant, maybe at your own workplace, maybe on a flight you paid for with your own money, or maybe you watched it happen to someone else and didn't know what to say. Tell me about it. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry or relieved, or just made you stop and think for a second, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because these stories matter, and so do you. Power isn't always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the quietest person in seat 2A, the one nobody thought to take seriously, who holds the keys to everything. And real respect, the kind that actually counts, should never depend on someone's title, their bank account, or the color of their skin.